In the last few minutes, it's been announced that the Moors murderer Ian Brady's died. Brady and his then-girlfriend Myra Hindley sexually tortured and murdered 5 children between 1963 and 1965. The couple buried at least 4 of the bodies on Saddleworth Moor near Oldham. Brady died at Ashworth Psychiatric Hospital on Merseyside. He takes to his grave the location of one of his victims, 12-year-old Keith Bennett, has never been found despite desperate pleas from the boy's relatives for Brady to reveal his burial site. Well, we're joined now by the former police officer Norman Brennan, who represents the victims. This has just broken in the last few minutes, Norman Brennan, so give us your first thoughts.
Well, my first thoughts are that these 2 individuals, Myra Hindley and Ian Brady, they murdered 5 young children, one of whom was Leslie Ann Downey, whose family I represented for many years. And when they murdered her, she was only 10 years of age. She was lost on the moors, and they recorded what they actually did to her. I remember staying with Anne West and Alan, her mother and father, a number of times, and I met them dozens of times. And the grief and torment that I saw in their faces was beyond probably many that I'd actually met. I've met hundreds of families that had somebody murdered, and it's always dreadful. There's never a nice way for anyone to be murdered. But to know that your daughter was lost, alone, and murdered, and then actually her death was recorded, the grief can never, ever be etched from your mind. And those 2 individuals, Myra Hindley and Ian Brady, they didn't just destroy 5 young children's lives. For their relentless appeals and false hopes that they gave the families for over 50 years, destroyed all of the families as well, even to this day.
He never released the burial site of Keith Bennett, and that family never recovered. Keith's mum went to her grave tormented in the way that you describe, having begged him many times. Do you understand that mentality?
Well, they both had serious psychological issues, and they then played mind games with the media. And as you rightly say, Keith Bennett did. I remember Winnie, and I met the other families as well. And when you saw them on the television, you could only imagine the torment. You know, when we get up and we've had bad days, we hope the next day will be better. Well, when you've had somebody murdered, certainly in the circumstances that Myra Hindley and Ian Brady murdered them, that is torture that exists 24/7, and you can never comprehend it. I sometimes try to comprehend how these families exist, and when I look in their faces, I just see an emptiness. And with every murder, time stops and life changes. And for all the victims of Myra Hindley and Ian Brady, life changed forever. They had a life sentence for over 50 years, and today I don't know if it's going to bring closure to anybody, because sadly many of the families, actual parents, have died too.
Norman, you raise a really interesting point when you talk about psychological issues, because this case caused something of a sort of complication in the public mind, this idea of mental ill health versus pure evil. There were people who said they weren't mentally ill, this was just pure evil.
You're right. You're absolutely right there. I've described Myra Hindley and Ian Brady of 2 of the most evil people I've ever met, and they are evil beyond belief. And maybe the pair of them tried to fool the prison authorities with their mind games by playing mind games about, you know, their state of mind at the time that they actually committed those murders. And not everybody that commits a murder is psychiatrically ill, and probably they weren't psychiatrically ill, but they tried to convince us. And every time they tried to convince us, it just twisted that knife in the wounds of all of those families a little more. And many of them, as I say now, have died with no peace. I remember seeing Leslie Ann Downey's mother, Anne, in her coffin. And I remember looking at her body, and I looked at her face, and even in death, I saw torment on her face. And I've seen many dead bodies as a police officer, and I'll never forget that face. And I just hope that there's some respite for the families that are still alive today that have lived with over 50 years of grief and pure torment.
Norman Brennan, thank you for sharing your time with us this evening. Appreciate that.